I'm starting to think Pete Hegseth actually wants to get fired just so he can return to drinking every night. I mean, I'm joking. But honestly, at this point, maybe I'm not. The only flaw in that theory is that Hegseth has probably been drinking throughout his entire tenure anyway, considering his time as Secretary of Defense has been one scandal after another, one screw-up after another, and leak after leak. But this time, Pete Hegseth stirred up chaos not with a leak, but with a directed mission and a wild attack on Stephen Miller, delivered straight to Miller's wife. It was a full-blown meltdown, and we're going to break it all down. But before we get into that, if you wouldn't mind quickly leaving a like on this video, and if you enjoy our channel and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps support what we do. Now, before we dive into why Hegseth decided to confront Stephen Miller right to his wife's face for reasons nobody understands, other than maybe he truly hates his job and any remaining respect he might have had, which is already non-existent, I want to start with the latest trouble Hegseth has found himself in, because the bad news just keeps coming. And it's looking pretty rough for Pete Hegseth.
Well, at least that's what it feels like this week, but hey, it's only Wednesday. On Monday, Hegseth, with the help of White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, attempted to throw Admiral Frank Bradley under the bus, saying he's the individual responsible for the highly controversial double-tap boat strikes in the Caribbean on September 2nd, which lawmakers on both sides of the aisle and lawyers and experts believe may have constituted a war crime. Yesterday, Pete Hegseth at Donald Trump's cabinet meeting seemed to endeavor to further embarrass himself, with Hegseth claiming, hey, I wasn't even in the room for that second boat strike, which was not exactly the impression he left with his former colleagues at Fox News when he went on their airwaves the day after the strike took place.
That was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
Brings us to today, almost a full circle moment for Pete Hegseth and the Trump White House. The initial massive scandal, which embarrassed the country and Donald Trump and his national security team, Signalgate. It was a massive national security breach. It was made possible entirely by the sloppy and haphazard nature of Donald Trump's national security team when they shared national security information, including war plans. And then former National Security Advisor Michael Waltz accidentally added Jeffrey Goldberg, a journalist from The Atlantic, to that group chat on Signal. A damning new report is being released from the Pentagon's Inspector General. That is the top watchdog at the building that Hegseth is in charge of running. That report says that Pete Hegseth shared information in that Signal chat, information that put mission operations and servicemen and women at risk about a pending military operation in Yemen that took place in March of this year. The Defense Department's Inspector General finds that while the mission ultimately was not jeopardized, Pete Hegseth violated his department's own policies when he used Signal, a commercial messaging app that is not approved for sharing classified information. The Inspector General's report, scheduled to be published on Thursday, was described to The Atlantic by numerous U.S. officials familiar with its findings. Now, while that controversy ultimately led to Michael Waltz being removed from his position as Donald Trump's first national security advisor, Pete Hegseth and the White House have maintained that he did nothing wrong. The Pentagon's chief spokesperson today called the Inspector General report a total exoneration of Hegseth. It's important to remember that if anybody did this who was not named Pete Hegseth, like any of the men and women farther down the chain of command, those men and women would be thrown out of the military and almost certainly face criminal prosecution.
Pete Hegseth is the most embarrassing figure in Donald Trump's administration, which is a crazy accomplishment to have considering that Pam Bandy exists, that Kash Patel exists. Scott Bessant is regularly getting into physical brawls with members of the Trump administration, and somehow Pete Hegseth has beaten them all out. The idiocy is top-notch. If he could distill it down, he would, and then he would drink it because it is a proof that I really can't even imagine at this point. Yeah, Pete Hegseth seems to want to be involved in scandals. It is literally the only explanation, and I mean literally the only explanation for why. While he was on Katie Miller's podcast, Stephen Miller's wife, which first of all, time out. Why does Katie Miller still have a podcast? Why is she on CNN? Why is anyone platforming this lunatic? She's not even a good communicator. But while he was on Katie Miller's podcast, which shouldn't exist, he decided to blurt out this attack on her husband. Pentagon. Pete says he wouldn't let Stephen Miller babysit his kids. Hegseth has said he would never let Stephen Miller babysit his children. An awkward comment made even more cringeworthy by who he said it to. Miller's wife. The Secretary of Defense made the comments on the Katie Miller podcast when she asked him, "Who would you trust to babysit your kids?" clarifying that it had to be another member of the cabinet. Instead of immediately saying who he would trust, Hegseth opted to point out who in the cabinet and wider Trump world he wouldn't trust. "I mean, not your husband or Marco," Hegseth responded, referring to White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Miller is not a member of the cabinet, though. Pete Hegseth's idiotic comment says so much on its own. First of all, Katie Miller should absolutely not have a podcast. That part is obvious. Stephen Miller isn't even in the cabinet, so the fact that Pete Hegseth talks about him like he is shows just how deeply involved Stephen Miller really is in the day-to-day operations of the White House. And honestly, it's hilarious that the people closest to Donald Trump, especially Stephen Miller, are the ones wrapped up in this mess about the Russia-Ukraine negotiations. Pete Hegseth has been mostly cut out of those talks and replaced by another top Pentagon official, Army Secretary Driscoll, leaving Pete completely sidelined. So for him to blurt out that he's furious with Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio for excluding him because he's such a drunk mess that even Trump doesn't want him near the negotiations tells you everything. And let's remember, Trump doesn't even care about these negotiations, despite promising the war would already be over by now. Pete's outburst at Stephen Miller is pure resentment. Why else would he say something that ridiculous? It's not funny to tell someone, "Oh, your husband sucks and would be a terrible father." That's not witty. It's pathetic. Pete Hegseth is a monumental idiot. And again, can we return to the fact that Katie Miller should not have a podcast? I'm pretty sure our channel gets close to 1 million times the views she does. Seriously. Thanks to all of you. We hit around 70 million views last month. If you check any random Katie Miller video, you'll likely see around 100 views. So yes, we're outperforming her. But this whole situation is still embarrassing. Not just for Katie Miller, but for Pete Hegseth as well. And I'm obviously not the only one who thinks this, because Ruben Go tore into them too.
To tell the country what Secretary of Defense Hegseth did was dangerous and put his men in danger. It's not that hard to figure out. Well, if you're sharing time, location, ordnance, and potential targets, where are the particular trajectories that some of these planes could be coming from, and the timing. And the fact that Secretary Hegseth couldn't admit that he made a mistake and then try to go back and say, well, it's not classified. It doesn't matter if it's classified or declassified at any point. The fact is that you shared information in such a dangerous way that you could have compromised the mission and compromised men and women, all to appease his little fragile soul, because he's just trying to make up for the fact that he is way over his head and he's just a TV show host pretending to be the Secretary of Defense.
When you see this IG report findings start to seep out, the full report will be released on Thursday, and you see the White House for at least the 3 days that we've all lived through together of this week, very publicly and rather brazenly blaming Admiral Bradley for the strike that is under scrutiny. What do you think the men and women of the military are feeling right now about their Secretary of Defense and Commander-in-Chief?
Well, the men and women of the military, the professionals that we still rely on, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and I have heard that they are just not exactly trusting the leadership of this man. They think that he is a joke and that he's effectively using our military to help him and help in whatever goal he has. And, you know, we were very clear, and you've seen the story change this whole week, but many of us that serve the military said what they did off the coast of Venezuela was an illegal act. You should not double tap. That's what we call in the military. People that are no longer in combat, no longer eluding, and the fact that he first bragged about it but then backed off from it and now throwing someone else on the bus shows you that this man is not ready for the job. He's not ready to be Secretary of Defense, and he is potentially putting our national defense at danger. Listen, this admiral has a lot more experience in combat than I had. You know, as an infantryman with the Marines in Iraq, we saw a lot of combat, but this guy knows and has seen a lot more, and he's faced this same scenario, I bet, just as often as I have in a personal capacity. And, you know, it is tough. It is tough to be in combat and then have to render aid to the terrorists that were just trying to kill you. But we did it in Iraq. And whatever happened, whatever these men and women that were in these boats, whether they were narcos, whether they were cartels, or whether they were fishermen.
How can anyone not be embarrassed by this guy? I definitely am. Everyone in the country probably is. When you appoint and confirm a Fox News-style cabinet, you're going to get Fox News-style results. And while that might be entertaining for Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone, it puts the rest of us in danger. And as Fox learned from lying about the 2020 election, it can cost you a massive amount of money and serious legal trouble. That's exactly what Donald Trump and his administration are facing, and it's exactly what they'll keep facing as we continue calling them out. That's why I'm going to do it every single day on this show. And if you want to support that and be part of this effort, as always, hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you made it to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.